In a hyper-capitalist society, losing your job often means being forced to live on the streets and struggling to feed yourself. In most countries, your options are either to get a meager welfare check or beg people for support. But just imagine if your government stepped up. It's okay, you don't have a job. Not everyone does. We are a well-doing nation. The state will take care of you. We are going to pay everyone enough to live by. This principle is called universal basic income. This concept has been in Finland since the 70s. Initially known as the citizen's salary, there have been efforts to adopt it since 1992. After several failures, an experiment for UBI started in January of 2017. After its successful rollout, UBI will be implemented nationwide. There will be no poverty, no one will be living on the streets, and no one will sleep hungry. The nation will reach new heights for the welfare of citizens, and it will remain this way forever. Or that's what everyone thought. This is the story of universal basic income in Finland and why it failed. Understanding UBI. Let's first talk about what UBI really is. If you're an adult wanting a monthly allowance, you'll have to find a job, and if you fail to do so, you won't get it. Imagine if things change, and in order to get paid, you don't need a job, you just need citizenship. Governments will pay all of their citizens enough to live by. The concept of UBI that we know of today has been evolving since the 1900s through theories and ideas. The first notable real-world implementation was Alaska's Permanent Fund Dividend in 1982. To this day, Alaska's residents receive dividends usually ranging between $1,000 and $2,000. The modern wave of UBI started around 2008. The first notable experiment was in a Namibian village in 2008 and was followed by an even smaller one in Brazil that same year. They both were followed by a larger one in India in 2010. These three were funded privately with no state support. However, within the next few years, initiatives were started by the governments across the world. So anyway, how effective were these experiments? That is still a debate. Some experiments have shown positive results. For example, Iran reduced its poverty rate from 4.3 to 2.5%. Alaska, having PFD, has a GDP more than only 2 other states. But when it comes to poverty, its rate is better than 38 others. But it's not like UBI succeeded everywhere either. There were some failures too, and one of them is Finland. UBI in Finland. Since the 1970s, the Centre Party and the Green Party have been discussing this idea for a citizen's salary. For context, these were 2 of the 4 major political parties in Finland. The idea at the time was vague, but as the discussions got serious, a group made up of all major parties was formed. Their task was to draft a book explaining the possibility of basic income in Finland, titled Citizen's Salary, Basic Income. The book was released in 1992. Now, at the time, Finland was actually this close to implementing UBI, but then there came an economic crisis. Naturally, this didn't leave them enough money for such a project. Late, but not never, by 2014, Finland was finally on its way to recovery, though they still had an unemployment issue. Their unemployment rate in 2014 was 8.7%, which was extremely high when you compare it to their Scandinavian neighbors, Norway at 3.5% and Denmark at 6.6%. Finland's general elections were to be held in April of 2015, and one party leader in her campaign was promising to experiment with UBI. After winning elections in April 2015, the Centre Party began Finland's first UBI experiment in January of 2017. For the experiment, 2,000 people were randomly selected based on only 2 criteria. They must be aged between 25 and 58. They must be unemployed as of January 1st, 2017. These 2,000 happy volunteers received a salary of €560 a month for the following 2 years. The question in the experiment was whether people would look for a job if they get paid without one, or will they just become lazy? In the first year, 18% landed jobs, Another 27% did in their second year. To compare results, another controlled group was selected that had similar conditions in January of 2017 but did not receive any citizen salary. Although the percentage of people landing jobs was almost the same as this group, a visible difference could be seen in the living standards and the mental health. Those who received basic income were way ahead of those who did not. 13% of the UBI recipients were living comfortably, compared to 8% of non-recipients. Also, 22% of those receiving the support perceived themselves to be depressed, compared to 32% of those who did not. With all of this, the experiment was clearly marked a success, and is now probably ready to be implemented nationwide. If you were still thinking this, you're wrong. The Finnish government announced in April 2018 that they would not be carrying this experiment any further, and it came to an end in December of 2018. The reality was that the UBI experiment had failed in Finland, but why? Why it failed? There were many elements that the UBI experiment failed. Most of them can be summarized in 3 categories. Number 1, political reasons. We just talked about the Centre Party winning 2015 elections. Can you guess the percentage of the votes they got? In Finland, there are 4 or 5 major political parties competing against each other in elections. The one leading usually gets around 20 to 25% of votes. This means there will be a coalition government of 3 to 4 parties. So, when the Centre Party won the elections, NCP and True Finns formed a coalition government with the Centre Party. With multiple parties come multiple ideologies, and you can't always get everybody to agree, especially over matters like UBI. The long-existing welfare system was also untouchable in Finland. Implementing UBI would have meant removing that old system, and the cost for that could have been votes. Number 2. Bureaucracy. 2 major constraints from the bureaucratic standpoint were a short timeline and a limited budget. The decision to experiment with partial UBI was made in May 2016, and it was set to start in January of 2017. This left researchers with only a minimum amount of time to prepare, and to top it off, constitutional committees only approved the experiment in December of 2016. Initially, the plan was to go with a sample of 10,000 people, but when the budget was provided, researchers had to cut the sample size down to 2,000. Also, the basic income was paid from the budget when the government saved money from welfare. Number 3. Social norms. When employment fails to provide basic needs, governments have to step up. To those in favor of UBI, it seems like an inevitable future. So if we make it into a reality, it will usher in more economic freedom, giving people an option to choose and change careers with fewer risks. While this argument is valid, it becomes irrelevant when it comes to Finnish society specifically. Though the Finnish model from the 1990s was based on equal rights and universalism, the 2017 version was only about making people take part in low-paying and temporary jobs, making it bound to fail. There's another question about worthiness of UBI recipients. Many taxpayers weren't happy with this project, as they do not believe the recipients are trying to get jobs, so spending tax money on this is just not worth it. What's ahead? The experiment was considered a failure, and UBI was not implemented. Still, even if it had not failed, we likely wouldn't have seen UBI implemented nationwide. You see, UBI is a heavy spending project, and to collect that kind of money, new taxes needed to be introduced. And the next question will be,
how much are we talking about in terms of tax?
There would be something like 10% more in taxes.
Nobody's ever going to vote for that though, are they?
Yeah, it would be difficult. It would be difficult.
As we discussed earlier, taxpayers did not trust the fairness of the program, so collecting this much tax would not have been an easy task. To understand how big of a failure this experiment really was, let's look at the elections in 2019. The Centre Party, which was victorious in 2015, ranked at number 4 in 2019. Though they did form a coalition government with the victorious SDP, their own position was enough to show people's disappointment in UBI. Finland doesn't see another experiment of this kind. Researcher Heikki Hilamo who once wanted to be part of the experiment team, does not see another experiment in the future.
We don't actually know if there's going to be a new experiment. I'm quite skeptical that there will be a new experiment. If there will be a one, it will be a very minor scale experiment, perhaps something to do with reducing bureaucracy.
Before we end this video, do not let this failure distract you from the successes of UBI in other parts of the world. If the experiment gave positive results in Iran and Alaska, your country might bring in some good results too. Tell us your country in the comments and let us know what you believe would be the result of a UBI experiment where you come from. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to stay tuned. See you in the next video.